now I've got a lovely man who I know very well who's going to speak next. And, you know, he's got the 10 o'clock session, which is when the meetings start, but he can hold the crowd together. I'm confident if anyone can, Eric can. So without further ado, please put your hands together for Eric for DAB.bio.
Have fun. Thank you, Paul. Raising the bar. Good morning, and thanks, Paul, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and be back in my beloved Singapore, where I spent a lot of years of my working life. I'm going to talk to you about the next paradigm in cost reduction in breaking the cost barrier of bio-based products. Oh, I need my clicker. But before that, some context and some purpose. So if you plot the energy consumption of mankind in a 16,000 year or so scale, you see something like this. We've been using solar, wind, biomass for the longest time. And then in approximately 200 years, we're burning through an enormous amount of stored energy, carbon, really stored solar energy. And then we have another 10,000 years to go or so. So what this really means is that one way or another, when it comes down to carbon, in fact, when it comes down to energy, we need to move to a renewable system. And to make matters worse, because of the amount of carbon that we used, we managed to grow the world population from 1 billion to 10, some people believe 12 in 50 years' time. So we also need 5, 6 times as much energy. So there's quite a challenge. So what we really need to do is go back to solar flows rather than solar stocks. So we need a mechanism to go from a very primitive capture, which is what we've always done as humans, to a tech-aided capture, let's say industrial biotech. So that's for context and purpose. And now, so we need to defossilize, right? We need to reduce the amount of fossil that we use. And I think there are 3 very important reasons. And obviously the third one is a relatively new one, although it's actually not that new. So fossil is finite. So we need to stop using something that is finite. We're running into a tunnel, but it's obviously not that finite. There is a lot left for, you know, easily 100 years. Climate change has been a very big driver for about 15, 20 years. And climate change is a bit of a hiccup, right? It's happening, but geopolitics are currently more important than climate change, it would seem. But because of geopolitics, strategic autonomy is now a very important driver. Strategic autonomy, using your own resources, biomass. In some countries there is more, in other countries there is less. Instead of importing fossil energy, fossil feedstock from the Middle East, the US, and other places. Strategic autonomy is really what drove the large bioethanol adoption 40 years ago. It wasn't about climate change. It was really about, hey, we can do this with bio. Let's replace the oil with a bio-renewable compound, being ethanol, being very successful. So in terms of purpose, we need to decarbonize. We need to reduce the amount of carbon that we use, electrification, for instance. And then we need to defossilize. We need to transition from fossil carbon to renewable carbon. Now, microbes, as we all know, are very capable of producing pretty much everything. I would say everything that we can make from fossil, but there's a problem. It's too costly. Massive investments, I don't know, $100 billion or so in the past 15 years, have not led to very much. On the left, 2004 DOE study has been updated a few times. 12 chemicals, 20 chemicals, good candidates to replace fossil chemicals. $1 billion spent on butanol, $1 billion spent on succinic acid. Not much left of that, certainly no return on those investments. There's very little over 10 kiloton per annum out of that program, out of that venture capital and government-backed program. Chemical derivatives, a little better. BDO, PDO, feedstocks for fabrics. Gino sold licenses, and Cargill opened a plant last year. And Husung here in Vietnam will open a second plant, a very big one. So some success there, but again, 100 kiloton, maybe 200 kiloton, nowhere near the millions of kilotons that we need to replace. Biofuels, big success in ethanol, 100 million tons. That is a really significant amount, and it was really because of mandates, the forced use of this product, that demand was assured, and therefore plants were being built. And now we just heard from Braskem that because of this capability to produce ethanol cost effectively, we can now also use it as a feedstock for chemicals. So that demand creation, plus of course the ability to make ethanol, has been very successful. Other than that, not that much, with the exception of SAF. Mandates are in place. There is a lot happening there. Now, cost of goods is the main issue. And it's really important that we realize in our industry that most of this is fundamental. We cannot compete with fossil at $60 per barrel. It's currently 80, by the way. And if it was 150 again, it would be a different story. But then still, the price of oil goes up and down. It is manipulated in the sense that there's a cartel, there are supply chain disruptions. So it can be higher today, but if you build a plant for 30 years and it goes down again, then your economics are out of the window again. There is lower yield. In a refinery, you take 100 units of oil in and 96 units of product come out. That does not happen in a bio plant. A lot escapes as CO2, there's a lot of water, and so forth. So really, most of those things we cannot change, with one exception, and that is the way we manufacture in bio, which is typically batch or fat batch. And this is an area where engineering, process technology, and process design, chemical engineers, can actually make an impact. So we should reduce the cost of goods of circular products. We cannot bring them to the level of fossil, certainly not at $60, but we can close the gap or reduce the gap as much as possible. And then, of course, we should have government incentives, regulation, particularly mandates, to make sure that the demand for that now slightly more expensive product is assured, plants get built, and we get to a fully optimized system. That should be the roadmap. Now, that's my introduction, so I'm halfway, I realize that, but I thought it's important. Intensification is really what we need. So if you're in biotechnology, industrial biotechnology, you can optimize your strain, and I would say 95% of the money that is spent on R&D goes into the strain. I think that 95% is a bit too much. The amount may be right, but the balance is not. You have your best feedstock, whatever that may be, and you got the largest scale. Now, at that point, there's nothing you can do anymore. Your strain cannot be better than the chemistry of the product you're converting. And your scale is already large, and your feedstock is the cheapest you can get. If you then want to go further, you need to think about the process. How can I intensify my process? How can I move from batch or fat batch to continuous or other forms of process intensification? And this is where we need innovation. And this is what DAB.bio and some other companies that we know, and some are here, are doing. Now, continuous fermentation, if you did a literature search, you'll find lots and lots of papers that prove that theoretically continuous fermentation is substantially better. It also highlights that there are good reasons not to do it, particularly that you lose your biomass and that there is a number of other factors at play. But if you did continuous fermentation, if you would go, let's say, from 2-3 day batch to say 10 days or 20 days, or maybe even 100 days, as LanzaTech is doing, you would have substantial benefits on each of the metrics, titer, rate, and yield. And in particular, you win on the rate. You have a far better utilization of your plant. And this is what chemical engineers, looking at you again, this is what we know in the chemicals industry. If you utilize your plant better, you have the lowest cost of goods. You may even have a lower titer. We don't talk about titer, actually, but you may have a lower product concentration as long as your overall plant utilization is higher. So this is what we can do. You need less CAPEX because you get more product out and you have better unit economics. Now we enter FAST. FAST is the fermentation technology that DAB.bio has developed out of the University of Delft in the Netherlands, where we have integrated a continuous separation inside the sterile fermenter. So with this device, the top section of this device, you continuously separate, based on gravity, two phases from each other or solids from liquids. So now you have a device within the sterile environment without filters, membranes, or pumps, where you can take out your product continuously from the fermenter. And by taking it out, you overcome a number of problems. For instance, I think this is the next one, you keep your biomass inside, so you only have to make your biomass once. Now, for the biotechnologists amongst us, that also means that you need to decouple production from growth. There's a number of important elements to be considered here, but there's no fundamental issue that you could not do this by design inside your strain development. You take your toxic product out if your product is an alcohol or an aromatic or a terpene. And if your product is slightly more oily, like fatty alcohols, emulsification is a big problem. By taking the product out, there is no emulsification. So continuous product removal, so known as ISPR, is a way to enable continuous fermentation. Not continuous as a chemicals factory, 2, 3 years, and then you have a stop, but continuous as in 2, 3, 4 times as long as a fat batch. And then you have a substantial uplift in your economics. Most of the cases that we do with our customers, we end up with between 20 and 50% reduction in cost of goods, driven by primarily rate, so better unit economics, and the rate weighs heavily on your CAPEX. You need less fermenters if you get 2 to 3 times as much product out of them. And these are some of the examples. We work on 3. Actually, there's a 4th category, gas fermentation using CO and CO2 as a feedstock, but we work primarily on these 3 lipids, long-chain fatty alcohols, for instance, surfactants, also biofuels like farnesene. Extractive fermentation, the extraction of toxic chemicals, very important in the flavors and fragrance industry, where most of the products are toxic to the microbe. Continuously adding an extractant and continuously removing that extractant means you control your concentration in the fermenter and you no longer have toxicity. And cell retention, keeping the biomass inside, doing a modification to the biomass, again, can be easily addressed in strain development, making sure it is heavier in the top section so that it stays inside while you draw out the liquid, so the water with the product. And this is particularly interesting for proteins and enzymes, and also for small molecules. Now, this is then how it works. Very simplistically put, the 3 drivers. Fat batch, you increase your rate, you peak rate, your rate goes down, you stop, you clean, and you start again. If you were to prolong that by 2 or 3 cycles, you do not have all that downtime. This is easily a doubling of your productivity, of your space-time yield. The yield, if you keep the biomass inside and you keep it there for 2 or 3 times as long, you need less biomass per kilo of product, you have a yield improvement. And the titer, depending on your process, you can boost the titer. In fact, you can also reduce it. You can control the titer, which often has a positive benefit on your DSP cost. So this is where this 20 to 50% cost of goods reduction comes from. Now, most of the work we do is with clients. Clients typically have strains, or they procure strains, or they have them developed by other companies. And I cannot talk about the data. We have a lot of data. We've been around for 15 years. But what we have now done is we've developed a biokinetic model, a very precise biokinetic model, where we can use the customer's data or public data to say what the impact of continuous fermentation would be if all conditions are ideal. And this is what we now use increasingly to engage customers. And that's why I can confidently say that we have this 20 to 50% cost of goods reduction. Depends on the product, depends on the feedstock, depends on the circumstances. And schematically, it looks something like this. In my view, there is always going to be a cost penalty to fossil if we assume that fossil is between $60 and $80 a barrel. This is a given. Now, if you have a fully optimized strain, then that is the best you can do. The chemistry that the strain uses to make that product, that is the best you can do. If you then put it in a process, in any process, you lose some. There's inefficiencies, there's losses. You lose some in DSP. You lose, you have inefficiencies in your reactor. You have energy consumption that may be higher. So you have an additional cost penalty by going from your perfect strain, your fully optimized strain, into your okay or your good plant. But this plant now, the standard of a fermentation plant is fed batch. And I just explained that you can have a substantial cost reduction by going from fed batch to continuous. And then you get something like this. You get closer to the optimum of the strain. You never get there, of course. There's always losses in plants, but you get closer. So you now have the least cost penalty available in your bio-based product. And this is the message that I would like you to leave with. There is a lot of stuff that we can still do. We have to talk to our governments, and with geopolitics as a driver, I think our governments are much more interested in biorenewable feedstock than they were in the past, and make sure that we get to the lowest cost so that we have the least penalty in wide-scale adoption of bio-based products, fuels and chemicals, as well as food. So work with us on development. We have a 2-liter lab version that you could procure, so you can do your own development. We can also do the work for you. Then you have to pay us, of course. We have a 500-liter demo plant up and running in a reputable CDMO in Europe. And we have a retrofit design, currently working on a 50-meter cube fermenter in a CMO. But we can also retrofit your units, unless, of course, you wish to build new. And then join us and go on this journey. It does require work. It does require process development. Your fed batch process needs to be changed. Probably your strain needs to be changed, not so much fundamentally, but if you go from a fed batch to a continuous process, you want a marathon strain rather than a sprinter. So thanks for your time.